Everybody ready? Good afternoon. This is a follow-up press conference to the officer-involved shooting last night from 103rd Street. Recovering the facts, around 7:35 last night, one of our officers observed a vehicle that was traveling northbound on I-295 near 103rd Street. That vehicle had an expired tag. Officer made a decision to conduct a traffic stop, initiated the traffic stop, and the vehicle exited from 295 onto 103rd Street, where it stopped in about the 7,000 block. The vehicle was driven by a black male and had a black female passenger in the car. The officer got out of his car, approached the driver of the car, asked for his license and information. The subject told the officer that he didn't have his license with him and gave him a name and date of birth. The officer went back to his car, conducted an investigation to try to confirm the identity that had been given. Wasn't able to find any direct name associated with the information that he was given. Went back, asked for more information. Another name and another date of birth was given to the officer. He returned back to his car at that point in time, conducted a further investigation, found a photograph of what he believed with some of the associated information that he'd been given from both times that matched the suspect's description. The suspect, whose information he found, had a suspended driver's license. So he goes back and approaches the driver, knowing that the person whose picture he found matched what he looked like, asked him about it. The subject confessed that, yeah, that's me, that date of birth was right, my license is suspended. The officer decided at that point in time to make the arrest for driving on a suspended license. The officer asked the subject to step out of the car, and he cooperated. When the subject stepped out of the car, the officer took his handcuffs out. It should be noted that the subject has about 100 pounds or so on the officer in weight. The subject was fairly stocky. The officer ended up using 2 sets of handcuffs to effect the arrest. Flipped the 2 sets of handcuffs together. When the officer placed one handcuff on the subject began fighting with the officer. He pushed the officer, swung at the officer, and a fight there ensued at the car. The subject was able to get out of the grasp of the officer and flee through another set of the parking area that was nearby. The officer gave a short foot pursuit, took his taser out, his electronic control device, deployed the taser at the subject and struck him. This caused the subject to fall to the ground. The officer closed that distance and went back to take physical control of the subject. When the officer got back to the subject, the fight continued. The officer again attempted to handcuff the subject. The wrestling went on there. The officer tried at the second time to deploy his taser or electronic control device. It did not perform as the officer wished. It had no effect. He took the cartridge off the front of the taser and began to use the taser, or attempted to use the taser without the cartridge. It still functions as a taser. You must press it against the body. It would still have the same control. He attempted to do that. That also had no effect. During this time, during the wrestling around, the subject was able to take the taser and disarm the officer. Took the taser, had full control of the taser. The officer tried to get some distance between he and the subject to reevaluate the situation. That time the subject stood up. Now the subject is now armed with the officer's taser and also armed with 2 handcuffs hanging off of his wrist. This is a sharp cutting instrument, and we're taught in the academy to treat it as such, that once they become armed with that, that is actually a weapon. It can hurt you pretty bad. So not only did he have the handcuffs on him, but he had the officer's taser. Stood up, looked at the officer. Now, the entire time during this, the officer's giving loud verbal commands for the subject to stop, to comply, to stop resisting. He continued to do that. The subject looked at him, charged at him. The officer deployed his issued firearm, fired 2 times, striking the subject once in the upper body, once in the leg. It caused the subject to fall. Fire rescue was called, and he was announced dead at the scene. The officer, per our policy, has been placed on administrative leave. Identified that officer last night as Officer Cecil Grant. He's a 1-year veteran with the Sheriff's Office. This is his first officer-involved shooting. The subject has been identified as 33-year-old Leonardo Marquette Little. Mr. Little has an extensive but seemingly minor history with the Sheriff's Office arrest-wise. He has charges for driving while license suspended, some for fighting, some for resisting an officer without violence. And this can either be by false name or just not listening to the officer when he's trying to place him under arrest. he had a possession of marijuana charge, various things that he had been charged with, none of which seemed extremely serious. I can take some questions if anybody has them.
Dana training for Times Union. Were there any other warrants on this fellow?
No, he was not wanted for anything else. The female passenger in the car was cooperative with the police. No charges were placed against her, but in her conversation with us, she told us that when the officer came up, she asked, what's wrong with your license? He said it was suspended. He also told her at that point in time that he was not going to go back to jail. She was cooperative again and was not charged and released.
Is there a dash cam surveillance of what occurred, and is that going to be released?
No, there's no dash cam in our patrol cars.
None of them
No,
here.
Dana training. Did he have any time? Did the officer have any time to call for backup, or was there was a span of time when the officer was researching this person?
Yeah, well, there was plenty of time that he could have. And I've said this before, there's no such thing as a routine traffic stop. Anytime one of these officers, not only with the JSO, but anywhere in law enforcement, when they make a traffic stop and they walk up, it is a complete unknown that they're walking into. This case, though, seemed, if there was a routine, this was it. He was compliant. He gave him information, although it wasn't correct. It didn't raise the suspicion of the officer at that point in time to call for backup. I won't say resources are limited. It shouldn't be a factor the officers consider whether they do or don't call for backup based on resources. But it wasn't enough at this point in time for that officer to think enough to call for backup. And then once the fight began, you're in a position at that point in time, do I fight and win, or do I fight and get on the radio and ask for help? And sometimes the fighting to win is what you do. And in this case, that's what happened.
How long was the fight?
The fight was a very short period of time, less than a minute and a half, maybe 2 minutes long, according to what the statement that we obtained was. The entire time of that call, which was roughly 30 minutes, it was the officer trying to do the research to figure out who he had.
The handcuffs, there were two linked together, is that right?
Two linked together.
So there was a stretch of handcuffs.
One of the pair of handcuffs is a hinged pair of handcuffs, which is a little bit shorter, and one of them was a chained pair of handcuffs. So you have roughly a foot-long object hanging off the subject's arm with one of the cuffs at the end that could be opened and used as a cutting weapon.
What kind of injuries did the officer sustain?
The officer sustained some minor injuries to his hands from the fight.
Quick question. The current political climate is tough for police right now. Do you want to say anything to the public who's probably looking at this with preconceived notions because of things that are going on in other parts of the country?
There's nothing that you can preconceive about this. This is different than every other one that occurs. We'll do an investigation into this use of deadly force. The State Attorney's Office will conduct their own separate investigation of this use of deadly force. And then from an administrative standpoint, and this is for every deployment of deadly force that we have that results in this, we will conduct an administrative investigation, and a response to resistance board will convene that will look at the deployment of deadly force.
And can you or anyone say anything about the other shot fired last night involving suspect Brian Dennison?
If there's some specific questions, I was not there. I can get the answers to you if you had some specific questions.
A specific question is, do we believe that the officer fired, do we believe the officer's actions were appropriate, and was there any awareness of the child in the car?
I can get those answers to you. The answer about the appropriateness would be dealt with in the same manner that I just mentioned. The administrative portion of looking into that case would be the response to resistance board, and that would make a recommendation to the sheriff on whether his response to resistance in that case of deploying his firearm was within policy or not.
And I'm sorry, is he on administrative leave?
He is not on
He's not on administrative.
On that same case, Dennison, did the officer here, Dennison, call out that he was trying to hurry home because his daughter had asthma and needed a treatment?
I can work to get that answer from you, but again, a specific question like that, I'll get back through the PIO to you, and we're able to release that, and the same for your first one, Scott.
Wonderful.
Going back a minute, I just want to get your thoughts on this. Do you think a conversation needs to be had among local law enforcement about how to interact with certain community members, or not that anything was done wrong here by JSO, but just between the black community, or fear among the black community, or fear among police officers with the black community? You think that conversation needs to be had in this current climate that we're in right now?
I'm really here just to kind of address that. That's a bigger question with some bigger impacts and further reaching aspects. I can tell you that the use of force in this case from 103rd Street last night will be investigated several different ways, both from a criminal aspect, from us in the state attorney's office, and, like I mentioned before, from an administrative aspect, to make sure that use of force, the use of the gun by that officer, is within our policy, and that the criminal would look into whether it was within the law. So,
In your tenure here, have you seen police officers be disciplined during police-involved shootings? If so, how many have you seen in your career?
yes, there have been several cases where officers used force, used deadly force, that have resulted in their termination. Several since Sheriff Rutherford's taken office. Previous to that, I'm not exactly sure, but I can tell you that under Sheriff Rutherford's administration, we have had cases that have been reviewed by the Response to Resistance Board where it was found that the officer acted outside of policy and decisions were made to terminate their employment.
Roger Reader, First Coast News, and you mentioned, Tom, that there's no such thing as a routine traffic stop, meaning that an officer never knows what they're going to confront.
That's true, Roger. I mean, you're walking up to these cars and you don't know what they've done. This may be for something as seemingly innocuous as an expired tag. You don't know where they're coming from. Just within the last month or so, we had a case where the Florida Highway Patrol stopped one of our murder suspects leaving the scene of a murder for a traffic violation. They had no clue that the subjects in that case had just committed a murder. You just don't know what you're walking up to. There's no such thing as a routine. It's one of the most dangerous things that law enforcement officers do, not only from the unknown risk that you face from within the car, but you're doing these on the side of the road in many cases. Numerous officers per year are killed from the side of the road being struck by cars. So it's just danger all the way around.
And you mentioned this was a first-year officer, first year on the street? Or?
Yeah, he was hired April 1st of last year, so this is within his first year.
Woody, First Coast News, is it normal to arrest someone for suspended license or take them in?
Yes. Yes.
Everybody.
I won't say everyone is. There's some certain factors that you have to have. With the history that this gentleman had with all the previous arrests that he had for driving on suspended license, that these are the folks who are out there running red lights and driving when they shouldn't be.
And how old is this officer, do you recall?
I'm not sure, Roger. I'll have to get that for you. But again, like I said, I can say
He's just out of the academy.
he's fairly out of the academy, had gone through his field training and was on his own. I can get specific times if you need, but it's within his first year. I get his age for you.
Why isn't he on administrative leave? I'm sorry if you said that, I might have missed it. But
That's within our standard.
Okay.
When you deploy deadly force,
that he is an administrator.
that he is on.
Oh, I thought you said he
administrative
wasn't.
leave.
Okay, I'm
No,
sorry.
he is.
Okay.
Brenda Thompson from WJCT. The autopsy was performed this morning. Is there any reason to believe he was under the influence for the Mr. Leonardo, I don't know his last name.
Little.
Yeah, Little was under the influence.
It's that's something they will look into. They'll perform a toxicology test on Mr. Little's remains, and we'll have that result in the future. It's hard to say. He didn't exhibit any signs of being impaired while driving. The traffic stop was merely for the expired tag.
Dana Trini again, what sparked the fight? This was a normal, routine sort of an affair, and then all of a sudden exploded. Was there something I missed?
Without leaping to conclusions, knowing the information that we had from his passenger, he said he wasn't going to go back to jail and that he was aware of his license being suspended. The placing of that handcuff on many cases is when the trigger point is for a fight to ensue. Reality sets in then as though, wait, I'm about to go back to jail. I really don't want to. And again, that I can't underscore the dangerousness of a subject who's armed with one of those handcuffs on their hand. They're heavy. You swing in that hand, you won't get hit by a normal fist. You could get hit by the hook end of that, or you can gain physical control of that use that as a cutting weapon, as a striking weapon. And this one, again, was a little bit longer than your normal set of handcuffs because it's two of them put together.
And you said that was a trigger point here when you put the cuff on.
When he placed that first cuff on, that's when the fight started.
And the passenger never got out of the car.
She never got out of the car. She was very cooperative. She remained in the car. She cooperated with us when we spoke to her. He had gone to pick her up from work. They're casual acquaintances. So she was just coming home from work.
You described Mr. Little as a stocky, or the officer, stocky man. How would you describe the size, the weight of Officer Graham?
A lot less than Mr. Little. Mr. Little was little in name only. He was 5'9", 273 pounds. The officer's about the same height and probably 100 pounds less than Mr. Little.
Could you give us some perspective on that, for those of us who've never been tasered? I know that all of you during the academy you are, but can you give us some perspective how powerful that shock is and the fact that this person didn't respond to that? I mean, give us some perspective.
When the taser probes strike correctly, it will incapacitate you for a very short period of time while the current is flowing through you. It will cause you, in many cases, to fall, go off your feet, lose control of your muscles. You'll fall over. Again, if these taser probes don't strike exactly, you'll get a diminished hit. One of the probes possibly made contact. The other one hit in his belt, actually went into Mr. Little's web belt that he had on. So he may have gotten some feel from the first one, and then the other ones we're not sure. And it is a diminished response as well when you're not using the probes and you're using just the touch stun of the stun gun or of the taser. It's a little bit less, but
That's less.
it's enough. It's enough to get your attention.
But the touch stun was working on the gun.
Yes.
So when he had the gun, it was active.
Oh, yes, without a
It was
doubt.
still working.
So there were
Something
probes,
you don't want to have happen again.
I'm sorry. There were probes that were fired once and one hit his belt. Are there another set of probes? Are there two sets or is it just one set and then that cartridge is?
It's just
expanded?
one set in each cartridge. So it's got the two probes and the wire. It fires from the gun. Once that fires from the gun, you can't fire another cartridge.
But you
until
can remove the
replace it.
cartridge, you can remove that and then you could use the press part of it.
Yes, you can
It's a
also
stun gun.
use that taser with the cartridge still on that's been deployed in a touch stun mode.
But you only one shot,
Right, one shot per cartridge.
It's not common to reload those, right? You don't reload a taser. You don't have time for that, right?
No, you do. You do. You'd have to take one cartridge off, set it on the ground, or drop it.
But not in
put
a
the other-
fight. You're not gonna change that in a fight.
Depends. If that officer deployed that taser, it didn't work, trained to know that that cartridge is spent, you're gonna take another cartridge, put it on, if time allows. He had some distance to close, and it appears that during that time he was closing that distance is when he set the second cartridge on the gun.
He did set the second cartridge on. Did it?
It did not deploy.
It did not deploy.
It did not deploy.
And then they fought and then Mr. Little
He,
acquired.
it what appears, and again, this is from the evidence at the scene, suggests that the officer may have thought that the second cartridge fired because he took the live unfired cartridge off the taser, setting it on the ground, thinking perhaps it had deployed.
Okay,
So when Mr. Little took the taser from him, it did not have a live cartridge on it,
but it did have.
but it still has the capability to be used as that. And again, once you have that done to you, you don't want it done the second time.
Anything else?
Any other questions? Thank you. And I'll see if I can get the.
Get those through PIO?
Yeah, I'll get them through. the
Okay.
Somebody asked the age of the officer? 28. 28, so I'm being told.
Some pages.
Okay.
What's your fact?
Christian,